Symonds, the lead auditor for Quality Students Union. This webinar presentation is a basic introduction to Quality Students Unions. So if everybody's ready, we'll make a start. What we're looking to achieve in this webinar is to give a broad overview of Quality Students Unions to help people just understand what it's all about. I go on to explore the two parts of Quality Students Unions in more detail. That's part A and part B. The concepts of self-assessment, self-evaluation and self-assurance. An overview of the audit process and explore some of the benefits of Quality Students Unions. We will sort of round off with explaining the next steps to get involved in Quality Students Unions and also give you an opportunity to ask any questions. With that said, I would encourage anybody to ask any questions in the chat box below as we go along. I'll try and spot the questions as we're going through and try and answer them as we're going along. Okay. So what is Quality Students Union? Quality Students Union is a completely new standard for students' unions. It was officially launched almost a year ago now. It's been extremely well received by the movement. It is the next step. It is a development on from SUI. It has links back to SUI and represents a different type of model. Quality is designed to allow a detailed and independent assessment of the quality of every single student union, regardless of its size, from the largest student unions to the smallest. It's designed to provide guidance and direction to unions to help themselves to develop, and that's quite a key feature. As I mentioned just then, it's been developed by NUS in response to feedback around SUI, so lots of the key features of Quality Unions are direct response to feedback received from SUI. It's also designed to complement and build upon previous and existing standards, and that's about avoiding replication with our existing standards, whether national standards or NUS standards. This Quality Unions takes that on board and builds up on those as well. This is the Quality Students Unions, and this is really the feedback from SUI, is that Quality Unions has been designed to be as accessible as possible. It really has been designed so that every single student union in the UK can participate. That includes FE colleges, particularly some of the larger FE colleges, but everybody can get involved. Even very, very smallest student unions, this system is applicable to all of those unions. It's free to enter, there's no cost. We have more exceptions, but on the whole it is free to enter. It's short. What that means is that the system takes into account the uniqueness of each student union and accepts that every student union is different and unique and based around what that student union does in its own particular context. Time efficient, the amount of time to participate in this system is as short as it possibly can be. It's to be part of the normal working process with the student unions rather than something that's now. It's also something that's very much about now. It's not a system where you work towards over a period of 1 or 2 years. It's something that you can do now, today, over the coming week or the coming months, and develop straight away. So that's quite a big difference as well. It's also transparent. Everything the auditor sees, every mark scheme, if you like, and criteria that the auditor has, the unions have as well. There is complete transparency around what the company works against, but also how the judgments are made about quality throughout the system. Unions work. It's an external verification in 2 distinct sections, which is Part A and Part B. It sets out the minimum standards, and they are really quite low-level standards, so it's kind of the entry point. You need to meet the requirements of Part A before they're eligible to proceed to Part B. Standard part of the system, it's a much bigger part of the system. It's an assessment process where you judge your own performance against a number of broad indicators and descriptors, which we'll talk about later on. This is that is set as a low standard, and Part B is something that's a little bit more challenging, depending on the level that you work, and we'll talk about that a lot more as we go through. Okay, Part A, first of all, basically requires that unions meet and can evidence the following 12 requirements, which are things like a strategic plan, annual audited account, monthly financial reports, etc., etc., etc. We upload this information to a portal, and it's very much situation. The portal gives typical evidence, and some things are very forward. A strategic plan is typically you would upload your strategic plan. The whole point of Part A is it's not meant to be overly onerous. Most unions should be able to complete Part A in somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes, assuming that you have the documents in place. Because it should be, for most people, a case of just uploading it. It's pretty quick to do, very forward. And what the auditor is looking for from Part A is that there's evidence that the document, the policy, the practice, whatever it is, so for example, the strategic plan, is in place. It exists rather than what the quality of that strategic plan or whatever the document is. So very much it's about a quantitative verification rather than a qualitative judgment. So basically, if you have an equality and diversity policy, that Part A is just saying, yes, you have an equality and diversity policy. It's not saying anything about the quality of that equality and diversity policy. Summary, very cool. Part A. Part A is the first of the two sections of the Quality Students' Union's award. Is essentially seriously yes or no questions. Yes, you have the policy, or no, you don't. It's readily attainable for the vast majority of HE unions and the larger FE unions. Submission shouldn't take more than an hour to complete. It is a prerequisite to enter in the main section of Quality Students' Unions. I think, in looking at Part A, if unions have any questions about not quite what they submit in any particular box, is to use the Quality Students' Unions portal and ask the question. It's not a one submission and that's it. It is, we can help unions to make sure they put the right sort of evidence in and then help them achieve Part A so that they can then become involved in Part B. Okay, Part A. Forward. I want to talk about Part B. Part B is the substantive part of Quality Students' Unions. It's based upon self-evaluation, which is something that we'll talk about in a great deal more detail shortly. It does a combination of quantitative and qualitative measures. So in the same way as Part A is around quantitative measures, there are an element of that in Part B as well, but also Part B really introduces a large number of qualitative measures. It's impact focused. So, okay, yes, you do have an equality and diversity policy, but it would also be saying under Part B, what is the impact of that policy? What's the difference it's creating? So at this stage, it becomes a little bit more challenging. It's a little bit more in actually what unions are doing. The principles of Part B are based on other existing quality models. Similar to this approach, evaluation approach would be offset, for example, use system, and as we progress through that, I can explain the similarities anymore if people are interested. It's also increasingly the QAA are very similar to this now. They've changed about the same time that the Quality Students' Unions was released to be a very similar model. I would say, if anyone who's interested in the technicalities of how the model was built. I'm very happy to talk about that. That's probably a bit beyond the scope of this presentation. So there's an opportunity at the end to contact me with any other questions. So if you're interested in models built and the differences between best practice models, contextual models, and good practice models, really have to talk about that. Okay, so the real formative part of this model was about identifying we built a model that was based around the principle of self-evaluating their own performance against a series of descriptors, which I mentioned is a very similar system that the system used by Ofsted and now by QAA. The descriptors were produced over a period of time, and they are based on a whole series of the key features that are identified of a quality student union. The quality mark is broken down into 3 core areas. Those core areas are governance, leadership management, activities, and outcomes. Basic governance, leadership, and management is how the union manages, plans, controls, and monitors its activities. Activities are how well the union does what it sets out to do, how well the union aligns its activities, needs of the members, and how effective or impactful those activities are. Whereas outcomes, the positive impact the union has on its members links to the wider impact project that's kind of undertaken as part of the wider work of NUS. Core feature of these 3 points was the concept that any of them can predict the third. What that means is that it was found that where a union had very strong governance, leadership, and management, and very strong activities, inevitably, or actually, in every case, that you will be generating strong outcomes. In the same way that a union that has strong activities and very strong outcomes will inevitably have strong governance, leadership, and management. So what that does is that really helps with the whole self-evaluation process and the auditing process, because it means that we don't have to necessarily look at every single aspect of the union, because we have this concept of the core areas predicting each other. So 3 core areas. There are 12 components. The components are, as you can see here, under governance, leadership, and management, planning, relationships and partnerships, governance, democracy, and people, and communication, services, participation, representation, and campaigning. Then comes its review, evaluation, context, and impact. Those 12 components have this descriptor. This descriptor, as we mentioned earlier, is developed from the key features of successful unions. These are a broad description made up of a series of detailed individual attributes at 3 levels: so good, very good, and excellent. And we'll see what descriptors a little bit later on, so that will be a little bit clearer what that means. It's important to note here that no one union will exactly match every single attribute at any one level. These descriptors aren't about the faculty that a union looks like this. In every case, it looks like this. It's not about that. It's about that this is typically the sorts of things that an excellent union would look like, or typically these are the sorts of things that would be placed in a very good union, or these are the typical things that would be in a good union. Much about the typical types of attributes rather than being an exact description of any particular union. This idea that quality unions are linked to other existing awards, some can be achieved by other awards. So, for example, a fully achieved good governance award corresponds to excellent in the governance descriptor. So it basically means that if your union has fully achieved a good governance award, you don't need to, therefore, do anything else under the governance section because you've already achieved excellent. Okay. So, Alison. Alison asked if we have achieved other awards, e.g. good governance, then do we still need to complete the self-assessment statement, or is there enough evidence in itself? No, that is enough evidence in itself. So you can immediately tick that one off, and if you're at the fully achieved level, you automatically achieved excellent. The same would be true for things like IIT at gold standard. There are other links in there with things like best bar none and with Green Award and other standards where investors and volunteers is also one that's referenced throughout as well. Okay. Their own performance by aligning their own activities and impacts to the descriptor for each component using best fit. So this is the process by which it works. Now, this aligning process a bit more in a second, so don't worry about that too much at this point. Okay. The 12 self-judgments provide an overall statement of the union's self-assessed performance, then produce a self-assessed statement for each of the 12 components to support the judgment. And that statement is basically what is verified rather than being audited. What the process basically is I'll just go over that again, is that the union goes through a process where they determine against these descriptors where they feel their performance best fits. They then support that with a narrative statement, and then an auditor will come along and verify the union's own self-assessment. Okay, more detail on self-assessment. Okay, as I mentioned, has basically two parts. The first part is evaluation, which is a process that unions use to judge their own performance. And the second part is assurance, which is the narrative that supports the judgment. So those two bits together, the evaluation and assurance, form self-assessment statement. Okay. Now, I will talk about this again slightly, but there is no way to approach self-evaluation. There are all different routes. It really is a case of finding a means to do self-evaluation that best suits your union. So what I'll do is I'll put a couple of different approaches that I use, but what I'm not saying is this is how you have to do it, because it is something that each union will do slightly differently, and it's about achieving outcome for your union. So, okay, approach is to work as a group, is to look at each of the components, make a judgment about the level of descriptor that most closely matches your union. It won't be an exact match, it will be best fit. Go back over each point in the descriptor and make a judgment about how confident you are based on the availability of evidence, and there's a judgment that's required. Now, the next slide, we'll look at a very small part of a descriptor, so hopefully this will all start to become a little bit clearer. So I'm going to try to demonstrate the highlighter method of doing this. Now, the highlighter method is basically very similar to what we've talked about here. It's about looking at these three. This is a very out of context extract from the strategic planning descriptor. Don't worry too much about what it says, because it's just here for illustrative purposes, or a bit out of context. But the highlighter approach is another approach we're using on how it can work. Is that you can use different colour highlighters. You can go through each level, and where you feel that absolutely describes what your union does, and have very strong evidence of it, you can highlight it in one colour. You feel that's what our union does, but I'm not sure if we have the evidence, you can highlight in another colour. So by explaining this, it hopefully will all become clear. So good, it says the union can demonstrate that as clear purpose and vision. In case that can be true. Highlight isn't working. In a very shaky way, you can highlight that, which is supported by a strategy to improve its outcomes on an annual basis. Yep, have that. Vision and purpose statement, or some other kind of central statement. Yep. So the idea, you kind of work your way down, and probably most unions, all this is going to be highlighted. So if we just highlight all of that, it's a little bit easier. So then we move on to very good. The union has a published strategy that is aligned to the needs of its members. Yeah, absolutely, I'm sure that. It is linked to current context in which the union operates. And it's worth it that some of the words and some of the terms that are used in quality student, there is a glossary that explains that as well. So if you're unsure about any of the terms, that's worth looking at, so particularly the word context in here. That may be something that, I'm pretty sure that our union strategic plan is linked to our current context, but it's not for me to evidence that. So what you might do is you might select a different highlighter for that bit. You are aware of the plan. I'm fairly sure of that, but I would find it difficult to evidence. And again, you work your way down all of these by doing it in the two colours. And then you come on to the excellent one. So it has a published strategic plan. It has its members. Both future, current. Special about future. And is it at the core? We need to determine. What I've demonstrated here is that once you go through this process of highlighting, it looks a bit of a mess with my shaky highlighting, is that what will probably jump out is that there will be a level where you've got red, and in this case it's going to be good, so you're very secure that your self-evaluation would say that you are good. It may be half red, half yellow, and it may also be some areas that are not highlighted at all because you're just not doing that. So the yellow is something that it's worth going away and trying to find the evidence to see if you can sort of to turn that into red highlighting, basically. Now, what you might find is that excellent, for example, that actually that are not highlighted at all. So that is an indication actually that you're possibly not at the excellent level, and actually that the area that's got the highest area that's got the most red in is probably the area that you're working in. Now, this is just a suggested way of self-evaluating. It is something that is used in other comparable systems. It does work, despite me making quite a mess of this document. What you'd find is they use strategic plan as an example, is that actually other descriptors, you'll find that actually what you end up highlighting will probably be less in some descriptors than it would in others. Something like strategic planning is fairly straightforward. And it tends to be, it's quite quantitative, so you do have it or you don't really. Okay, so I made some sense. So the assessment statements themselves. So you've gone through this process, you've evaluated, you've determined what level you are, and now you're in this process of self-assurance really. So you write assessment statements, and the self-assessment statements give you assurance of your evaluated judgment. So they provide the evidence for your evaluation judgment. So as we went through there and we were highlighting things, we were saying, we've got a strategic plan and we can clearly evidence that. So the self-assessment statement is saying, we feel that we are a very union because we have a strategic plan and we can evidence that. Noting here that the evidence of strong evidence will give you confidence in your judgments. Okay. Self-assessment statements. A good approach to doing this is to take roughly the following form, and that is where you talk about an activity, followed by output, followed by impact, followed by how would you know statement. What I try and do is if I go back, here, okay. We look at this. Okay. So it has a published strategic plan that has the needs of its members, both current and future, at its core. So that essentially, an activity has led to an output. Output has led to an impact. So there is the impact being that there is a strategic plan, and the knowledge of the plan amongst other stakeholders is good, and they may be able to cite some key elements. So that's the impact linked to that. What you do is, if you were talking about that particular statement in there, is that you would say, this is the activity, we're a strategic plan, the impact is, and there's another stakeholders know this plan and they have good knowledge of it. And then follow that with a how do we know that? How do you know that stakeholders and members know about your strategic plan? And that's quite a challenging thing quite often, but that's what you're looking to do. The practice would be to write statements that broadly align with the descriptors, and if we, again, that is the type of thing we just talked about there, where whichever union, X union, has a strategic plan that is fully understood by and by our key stakeholders. And we know this because we're a good statement to write because it links to the descriptor. You can see that it clearly sits in the excellent box. That gives you good self-assurance of what you're trying to do. Is to try and write statements that respond to the audit requirements. The types of questions an auditor will seek to answer during an audit and help with self-assurance. What I do is just share my desktop here so I can show you the different documents. So within the Quality Assurance Union's handbook, page 5 is around audit requirements. So again, if you look at strategic planning here, the union's strategic plan is the central document that describes how its themes and values translate into actions. They say, evaluating a union strategic plan, they will consider its self-assessment statement and out the following strategies. You're trying to write your statement, your self-assessment statement. It's useful to try and answer these questions. So, how does the union consistently improve its performance? What does the union do to ensure this consistent improvement? How does the union ensure this improvement are consistent with the union's individual context and the needs of its members, etc., etc. So it's good practice to try and first with your self-assessment statement to link this with the descriptors, and secondly to try and answer the questions that are being asked through the system. If you take that approach, what you'll find is that the self-assessment statements basically will build themselves. How it's formed and how it lays out will be in a direct response to the descriptors and the questions, and it will do the facts, basically. The approach to assessment, again, there is no one way of doing this. You can do it as an individual, you can do it as a group of people supporting one author, or you can do it as multiple authors. So there is no set way. I think what I'd always suggest is that if you try to do self-assessment as an individual, it's probably or inevitably likely that whoever attempts to do self-assessment does know every single thing about your union. And so involving as many people as possible in the self-assessment process is the best way of doing it. It's not, you don't have to do it that way, it's just a better way, I would suggest. The value from the process, the union should be accurate and should be honest. There's no point writing self-assessment that just inflates your impact on your activities. The value of doing this process if you are accurate and you are honest about what's actually happening there. Being consistent and you look at things and how you apply your evaluation, you need to do that in a consistent way. Be brief and to the point. What that means is that writing a self-assessment that has pages and pages of narrative that don't really get to any sort of outputs or more importantly, don't get to an impact, not really helping anything. It's better to be quite succinct and to the point and to be targeted. It will be a much more useful document to you. And be impact focused. And then that links to the brief and to the points. Where possible, when you put a statement in, say, we do X, and a lot of doing X, it creates this impact, or we do X, Y, and Z, and as a result of all of these activities, it creates this impact, and we know it creates this impact because. And that's the type of way that you should be thinking about self-assessment. The really core point is that not in quality students unions, self-assessment should become embedded as part of the union's annual cycle, not as an add-on. The best way to do self-assessment is not do it as something to do for quality students unions. You think there's an audit due to come every 3 years, or an on-site audit every 6 years. You try and self-assess every year. It becomes a fundamental part of your planning, your review, and your operating cycle through it is the best way to approach it. To try and do your self-assessment at the same time of year every year also, just as the consistency. there isn't a right way or a wrong way to self-assess, but what you're aiming to achieve essentially is quite vague. Ideally, you want to get a document that confidently and accurately describes your level of performance against the student union descriptors. So your self-assessment statement should be something that somebody can pick up and can read it and then say, I see that X union thinks that they're very good in the area of democracy, but it's all laid out here in the self-assessment. I can see how I reach that opinion. I think it's really important that the document for your union's own use, it reviews and reflects upon the activities, outputs and impacts of your union. That's really key, because done that way and done well, self-assessment becomes a fundamental tool in the planning process of the student union. So, a good student union should, a good self-assessment should achieve both of those aims. Actual audit. The thing to say about the audit is it's actually not an audit. It's actually far more about verifying the union's own self-assessment. So this is quite a difference to other sort of models that have happened in student unions before. It's not about somebody coming in and forming a completely unique opinion of that union. It's about the union has gone through that self-assessment process. There's decided where they feel, judge where they feel they're operating, and the auditor comes along and verifies that opinion. Really important and a fundamental part of student unions is that the concept that the union and the auditor work together through that audit process to verify the self-assessment. They reach consensus. It is really very much about the union saying that they are very democracy for these reasons, and the auditor saying, yep, I can see why you think that, I understand why you think that, I can see evidence, that makes sense. Whereas over here on activities, you're saying activities you're saying that you are excellent. Well, I can't really see the evidence from that. From what you do, you something else that can support that, and then reaching a consensus about what the that's really important part of student unions. As mentioned, there are objectives to validate the self-assessment statements, and that's about validating as in, here is the union saying this is how we evidence this point. So it's about saying, yep, I can see that evidence exists, it's real. It's about using the evidence to agree or disagree with the union's self-assessment. It's reach this consensus we just mentioned wherever possible. This is to ensure transparency, that by the end of the audit process, in as many cases as possible, on the end of the day that the auditor is there, the union and the auditor will have agreed the level of performance of that union. So no mark schemes or anything else. It is an transparent system. The final role of the auditor is to help the union to identify development areas and what is needed to achieve a higher level. Now, the purpose of the descriptors as well is the descriptors build upon each other. So if a union is achieving at a good level, it's pretty clear the areas that are very good that union hasn't achieved. And so those things become quite useful to start to build development plans, and a part of the audit process is in order to work with the union to develop those plans which come out of the self-assessment and evaluation process. Okay, the verification audit, unions will essentially be confirmed as, and it is confirmed, the union will have already decided where they think they are, so they'll be confirmed as excellent, very good, or good. So it's quite heavy, I think, that we've talked about. Part B has three core areas split into 12 components. You judge their own performance against each of the components using best fit. You need a self-assessment statement for each component that supports this judgment. You also verifies the union's self-assessment and agrees or disagrees with the union's judgment, or attempt to agree in as many cases as possible. It's then awarded good, very good, or excellent. So what are we becoming involved in quality student unions? Well, quality student unions provides a framework to assess and celebrate every union, regardless of its size, the work they do and the impact that they create. Quality unions promote effective review and evaluation and gives a means for officers, staff and other key stakeholders to really understand understand the areas of strength and the areas of development within the union, because it is really, the whole self-assessment process is a really reflective process. Basic requirements and promotion stretch. So part A is, here are the fundamental building blocks of a student union, whereas the excellent descriptor, each of the level is a stretching achievement for a union to reach those areas. I mentioned earlier that the descriptors provide a mechanism for identifying areas of development. We basically, you can look at the different levels of descriptor and you can see achieving here, but I'm not achieving here, and it's pretty clear what you would need to do to reach the next level up. Okay, the next steps now is that most of the unions, about 120, 130 unions, have already registered for quality student unions, but if any unions haven't registered, you can register the web address there, www.qualitystudentunions.uk. You can then upload Part A evidence via the portal, which, as I suggested, is a pretty quick thing to do, and then you can get working on your self-assessment. Now, this is a relatively quick presentation, and particularly the section around self-assessment can be a little bit of getting your head around sometimes, to understand the principles there, because it is quite a new approach for lots of students' unions. So we really encourage anybody who has any further questions, anything not clear as they go through the process, to contact staff or other members of the Quality Student Union team. You can contact me on the email there. Anything to do with Quality Student Unions, and I will try to answer it. And really, the final thing then is to ask if anybody has any questions. What I would say, if any questions, is I'll just cut and paste this web address in. I would ask that everybody does a little bit of feedback on how useful the presentation has been. Okay, presentation. No further questions. As I say, please do contact me directly. I'm glad to see that someone is suggesting that the search type evaluation was really useful. As I say, it is slightly confusing. It's hard to explain through a presentation. It's not as difficult in practice. I have to talk to anybody in more detail around the whole self-assessment process. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for joining this webinar, and thank you.